Before flight attendant Amy Sweeney was killed on hijacked Flight 11, she picked up an airphone and reported that 4 Middle Eastern-looking men had hijacked the plane. The fact is that Israeli men are Middle Eastern men who just happen to be Middle Eastern-looking. The voice of the hijacker heard from the hijacked plane's voice recorder reveals that the accent of the hijacker matches an Israeli Hebrew accent.
Take 1-800 DP. We're heading to the airport.
The next transmission comes seconds later.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, the danger yourself and the airplane. Let's take 1.
After 9/11, 1,000 Middle Eastern-looking Muslim men were swept into U.S. custody, but the media kept quiet about 60 Middle Eastern-looking Israeli men who were also taken into custody and held under great secrecy. On December 11th, Carl Cameron of Fox News ran the first of a 4-part series about a group of Israelis who were among the 9/11 suspects. These detained Israelis failed polygraph tests about their surveillance activities against the U.S. and were caught videotaping the 9/11 attacks from different angles. Fox News also reported that the evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 was classified, but a leaked 61-page report from the U.S. government's Drug Enforcement Agency revealed that another 120 Israelis, posing as artists, were also rounded up right after 9/11. Carrying counterfeit visas and green cards, the Israelis admitted that they served in the Israeli army in explosives, electronic, and military intelligence units. Did Middle Eastern-looking Israelis who were detained as suspects after 9/11 steal the identities of the accused Muslims? The leaked DEA report revealed that Israelis with Israeli military backgrounds had posed as artists and lived on Sheridan Street in Hollywood, Florida, just down the street from Mohammed Atta and 3 other accused Muslims. On August 18th, 1 month before the 9/11 attacks, a New York Times article by reporter Sheila K. Dewan described a group of 4 foreign artists who smuggled their way into the World Trade Center just months before 9/11. The artists occupied studio space free of charge on the 91st floor with 14 other artists and claimed to be writing a book called The Bee Thing. They also claimed that they constructed a temporary balcony on the 91st floor as a prank. Somehow, these so-called artist pranksters escaped the attention of the World Trade Center's heavy security companies. George W. Bush's brother, Marvin Bush, just happened to be the director of Securicom, which provided electronic security for the World Trade Center. By some mysterious coincidence, Marvin Bush's company also provided electronic security for 911's United Airlines and 911's Dulles Airport. So what were 18 foreign artists really doing living free of charge in one of the world's most expensive rental spaces? Many top engineering and demolition experts believe that the Twin Towers were rigged with explosives which caused the buildings to implode vertically in a typical controlled demolition. The reason the collapsing buildings looked like a controlled demolition, say experts, is because they were a controlled demolition. Photos and video recordings confirm that explosions occurred at the base of the 2 towers as well as in Building 7 before they fell. On September 24th, firefighter Louis Caccioli told People Weekly point blank, "We think there were bombs set in the building." That claim was echoed by many witnesses and by firefighters who heard the explosions just before Tower 1, Tower 2, and Building 7 collapsed. The steel-supported Twin Towers were built to withstand the impact of a passenger jetliner, yet the official explanation for their collapse is that the burning jet fuel heated the steel support beams and caused them to buckle. Expert independent investigators insist that it's impossible for jet fuel burning in oxygen to melt steel, and that most of the jet fuel burned up outside the buildings in clearly visible fireballs. After the crashes, the white smoke turned black, indicating cooling temperatures, not rising temperatures as reported. Why did a company called Controlled Demolition quickly haul away, melt down, and dispose of 499,850 pieces of structural steel that could have proved the temperature the steel had reached and the use of explosives? Why did Tower 2 that was hit last fall first, 53 minutes after being struck, whereas Tower 1 fell 1 hour and 28 minutes after being struck? An even bigger mystery is why Building 7, owned by Larry Silverstein, collapsed much later on in the afternoon, even though it had never even been hit. If these 3 World Trade Center buildings were rigged with explosives, when could the explosives have been installed, and who controlled access to the buildings? The 30-year-old World Trade Center has always been publicly owned and managed by the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. That is, until a Jewish businessman named Louis Eisenberg became the chairman. Eisenberg is an active leader in Jewish Zionist organizations. He personally oversaw negotiations that put the publicly owned World Trade Center into private hands. Those private hands belonged to 2 Jewish pro-Zionist billionaires named Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy, even though their bid was lower than other bids. Lowy served as a commando in the Israeli army, and Silverstein just happens to be the former chairman of the United Jewish Israel Appeal. With Eisenberg's help, they landed the 99-year lease worth $8 billion for half price at $3.5 billion. During the moving, renovations, and security changeovers, explosives could have easily been installed in the buildings without detection. George W.'s brother, Marvin Bush, was not only the director of the World Trade Center's electronic security company, he was also the director of the World Trade Center's casualty insurance company called Houston Casualty. That company terminated their insurance coverage for the World Trade Center before 9/11, right in the nick of time. Another suspicious company occupied the 16th and 17th floors of the North Tower. That company, called Zim Israeli American Shipping, suddenly broke their lease, paid a $50,000 penalty, and moved out of the World Trade Center only weeks before 9/11. Zim Israeli American Shipping is owned by Zim Israel Navigation, which just happens to be owned by the government of Israel. If the new owners, Silverstein and Lowy, knew about the 9/11 attacks in advance, why did they buy a 99-year lease to the doomed buildings? Because they could do the simple math. Silverstein bought the $3.5 billion World Trade Center with only a $15 million down payment, which amounts to 0.01% of the total. He took out maximum terrorist insurance coverage only 6 weeks before the attacks. The demolition of the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11 eliminated Silverstein's cost for an $800 million facelift to update the aging 30-year-old buildings. As soon as the spanking new World Trade Center is finally built and expanded to over 11 million square feet of rental space, Silverstein stands to pocket billions of dollars per month. In the meantime, U.S. taxpayers are covering Silverstein's so-called losses. Then there's the big payouts from insurance policies with mega-terrorism insurance, which Silverstein took out just weeks before 9/11. Silverstein is demanding a 200% payout by claiming payouts for 2 separate 9/11 attacks instead of 1. Silverstein's insurance companies, called Swiss Re and Munich Re, are the same companies under investigation for advanced knowledge of 9/11 and for profiting from 9/11 on the stock market. If Silverstein's insurance companies knew in advance about the attacks, why would they insure doomed buildings? Were these giant insurance companies handpicked to keep a lid on their insurance investigation findings and to ignore the evidence of 9/11 cover-ups? Silverstein has since bought out Frank Lowy, paid off investors and loan groups, put limits on victim compensation claims, and turned the publicly owned World Trade Center into the smelliest private real estate deal in American history. George W. Bush threw up permanent roadblocks to stop an independent investigation of the 9/11 events. When the 9/11 Senate Committee report was published, 27 pages that would have connected international banks to 9/11 were censored. On October 30th, 2003, A CBC television documentary investigated the 10-year friendship between the Bush family, the bin Laden family of Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi royal family. That friendship includes illegal presidential campaign contributions and partnerships in oil and weapons companies like the Carlyle Group. Since 9/11, 2,500 relatives of victims filed trillion-dollar lawsuits against 7 international banks, against the Saudi friends of the Bush family, and against the U.S. government for suppression of information. On 9/11, all U.S. flights were canceled, and desperate relatives of 9/11 victims were grounded.